Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and today it is time for the 11th installment in the Nation Roulette series. And well, finally, it's only taken 11 episodes, but we have a team who have consistently won silverware on the international stage. I know, it's a miracle, isn't it? Without wishing to belittle any of the other nations that we have covered so far, especially the likes of Colombia and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the 10 countries which are featured in this segment on my channel have won a combined total of just 5 international trophies between them, a number which the country which forms the subject of today's video alone can quadruple. Of course, as you'll be able to tell by the title and the thumbnail, it is the nation of Uruguay. Like in many countries, football was brought over in the late 19th century by immigrants and colonisers, with one of them, William Leslie Poole, a Scotsman, founding Albion CC in 1891, adding the football section to the club 2 years later. Albion would be the team from which the vast majority of the players for Uruguay's first ever international match would be selected, with 9 members of their squad taking to the field against their neighbours and bitter rivals, Argentina, in 1901. Although the match isn't officially recognised by FIFA, it was the first ever international game to be played between countries outside of the British Isles, but it wouldn't be La Celeste who ended up victorious, as Argentina triumphed 3-2. A year later, in a match which is classed as their first official match owing to it not being organised by Albion CC but by the Uruguayan FA on this occasion, which had been founded in 1900, Uruguay would be battered 6-0, a defeat which remains their record to this day. No matter though, as within a year they would finally taste victory for the first time, beating Albiceleste by the same scoreline which Argentina had beaten Uruguay by 2 years earlier. Their games became an annual affair, and in 1905 the Lipton Cup, named in honour of Thomas Lipton, was founded in order to honour those games, and they would continue to play it until 1929 on an annual basis, although with the growth of the World Cup, the Copa America and the Olympics, it has only been played 9 times since that year, with none at all being played in terms of the Lipton Cup since 1992. War had been raging on in the country for some time, but at the start of the 20th century, peace was finally established, meaning that the country started to experience an economic growth and, with it, plentiful opportunities to found football teams. Nacional were created in 1899 by Hispanic students, and the Central Uruguayan Railways Cricket Club would become what we now know today as Peñarol, as part of a general process to remove English from general business within the country and move permanently towards Spanish. Having said that, Uruguay do actually have a team that is called Liverpool, although they are nowhere near as successful as the team from which they plagiarised their name, having never won a Uruguayan championship. They would become founding members of CONMEBOL in 1916 and set about establishing themselves as a force to be reckoned with by winning the first ever South American Championship, securing the draw that they needed in their final game against Argentina to confirm themselves as champions. By the end of the 1920s, Uruguay were probably the best team in the world, perfectly in tandem with their economic boom, as their wool, hide and beef industries all brought in vast swathes of money. Between 1916 and 1929, the team won 6 out of the 12 South American Championships which took place, boasting the likes of Jose Andrade, a technically gifted box-to-box midfielder who was the son of a former slave, Hector Castro, a prolific forward who accidentally amputated his right forearm at the age of 13 whilst using an electric saw, and Hector Scarone, who would later turn out for the likes of Barcelona and Inter Milan, as well as averaging nearly a goal a game for powerhouses Nacional. Their crowning glories at this time though were 2 Olympic gold medals in 1924 and 1928, at a time when that was considered to be the most prestigious footballing prize in the world, with the World Cup, of course, only a plan at this stage. Their appearance at the 1924 Olympics in Paris saw them win plenty of plaudits for their style of play, with Gabriel Ano of L'Equipe, the man who would go on to become the brainchild of the European Cup, marvelling about their, quote, virtuosity in receiving the ball, controlling it and using it, close quote, as well as their movement off the ball. When the news filtered through to the Uruguayan public that the team had triumphed, the streets went crazy and a national holiday was declared. Their 1928 title, if at all possible, was even more emphatic and celebrated than the first one, not only because South American sides were now widely recognised as the best in the world, with Uruguay at the forefront of them, but because they managed to overcome their rivals Argentina by 2-1 in the final. In addition to this, FIFA gave them the hosting rights for the first ever World Cup, partly given their status as incumbent Olympic champions, but also because it was their 100th anniversary of independence and because their economy was doing so well at that point. True to form, it would be Uruguay and Argentina who would meet again in the first final, and after confusions with whose ball they should play with during the game, it was resulted in Argentina's ball being used in the first half and Uruguay's in the second. Argentina won the first half 2-1 and Uruguay the second half 3-0 to win 4-2 overall and lift the first ever FIFA World Cup. However, the Great Depression then happened and Uruguay were hit hard as global exports dried up, and they didn't even send a team to compete in the 1934 or the 1938 World Cups owing to their lack of funds, but also at the fact that barely anyone made the long voyage to South America from Europe in 1930 when they hosted it, as some kind of really weird revenge or something, I don't know. After a 20-year hiatus, Uruguay finally returned to the World Cup stage in 1950 when the competition took place in Brazil, and, as I've covered more in depth in a previous video, they stunned the hosts in the final in front of 200,000 at the Maracanã by winning 2-1. They had their second world title in their pockets, and not only that, but they also had the 100% record of winning World Cups in which they had featured, something which only Italy have ever matched in the competition's history. You may wonder why I've covered this early period of Uruguayan football so in depth, and that is simply because it was their so-called golden age, and after 1950 the national team began a steady decline in line with the country's failing economy, with the end of the Korean War lowering the demand and prices for wool, one of Uruguay's key exports. Their 1950 World Cup success remains the last one in that competition for them to date, with their best finishes ever since being 3 fourth place finishes in 1954, 1970 and 2010, losing to Austria, West Germany and Germany in those respective tournaments. After 1954, the country went democratic, which may sound like a positive change, but there was constant political unrest and inflation hit as high as 60% in the late 1950s. The severe lack of funds led to key players moving elsewhere, including Juan Schiaffino and Alcide Chichia, the two goal scorers in the 1950 World Cup final who defected to Italy to take up Italian citizenship. For some context, between 1916 and 1942, the team won 8 Copa Americas or South American Championships, but since 1942 they have only won 7, which is still more than any other nation in the competition's history barring Argentina and Brazil on its own, but it shows how much an economic slide impacted the team significantly. During the 1970s, the country was caught up in a brutal military rule, with censorship being used in full force and human rights violations becoming a regular occurrence. In fact, it is even speculated that they had the most political prisoners per population in the entire world at one stage. Unsurprisingly, during this period of more than a decade under the junta, Uruguay only made 1 World Cup finals in which they went out in the group stages, and they didn't even challenge at all in the Copa America. But when a return to democracy finally looked in sight and was achieved in the early to mid 1980s, they promptly won the next 2 editions of South America's continental competition. Who knew national stability could bring sporting success, eh? They would also qualify for the 1986 World Cup, although their campaign would be tarnished by brutal physicality and gamesmanship, with their defender, Jorge Batista, holding the record of the fastest red card in World Cup history, having been sent off after just 55 seconds in their group stage game against Scotland. They would only make the finals twice between 1990 and 2006, but in 2010, their first golden generation perhaps since the 1950s began to take shape, with the likes of Luis Suarez, Diego Forlan, Fernando Muslera and Diego Godin, and of course Edinson Cavani, starring as they ventured all the way to the semi-finals for only the second time in 56 years. Their tournament would, once again, be tainted by poor sportsmanship, as Suarez battered what would have been Ghana's winner in the quarter-finals off the line with his hands, before Hazzabhajan missed the resulting penalty and Ghana went on to lose the subsequent penalty shootout, where Suarez paraded around the pitch at full time as a hero. His tournament misdemeanours wouldn't end there either, as 4 years on, he bit Giorgio Chiellini in the shoulder during their win against Italy in the group stages, receiving a complete 4-month suspension from all footballing activities, although the team would bow out after a James Rodriguez masterclass for Colombia in the second round. However, despite their recent struggles, certainly in comparison with their early days, it is important to note that, in terms of major trophies won, Uruguay have won more than any other national team on the planet, with 20 major titles to their name. Not bad for a country with a population smaller than the likes of Croatia, Norway and New Zealand. Their league is simply called the Primera División, and it has been running since 1900, currently playing host to 16 teams. In 1923, some of the teams in the top flight, led by giants Peñarol, broke away from the league to form the Uruguayan Football Federation, separate from the FA, and in its first season, a staggering 32 teams competed in its league, including one called Uruguay Forever, although, perhaps ironically enough, they would only gain 1 point across the entire season and finished in last. However, the 2 seasons of this league are not recognised officially by the Uruguayan FA, and by 1925, attempts to reunite the two by the government no less had been made, leading to that season's league being abandoned midway through and the 1926 iteration being completely cancelled, with 1927 being the first completed season of Uruguayan football in 3 years. The league has only been cancelled twice more since, once in 1930 owing to them hosting the World Cup, and once in 1948 when the league ground to a halt as a result of a player strike. In 1994, the structure of the league was changed to include an apertura and a clausura, but unlike other countries who employ similar structures in their leagues, the winners of each of the competitions play each other in a national final at the end of the season to determine the league champion, instead of determining both of them as individual competitions and leagues. Between 2005 and 2016, the dates of the season were changed to fit in line with major international tournaments, meaning that their season was akin to top flights in Europe in terms of when they were held, an aberration amongst South American nations. Although from 2017 onwards, it has reverted back to being from February until December, with the exception of course of this season, which has been extended to March owing to the ramifications of COVID-19. Two teams have dominated the league since its inception, those being Nacional and Peñarol, who, out of the 117 completed seasons of Uruguayan top-flight football, have won a staggering 97 of them between them, with Nacional having won 47 and Peñarol marginally ahead with 50. Besides them, only Danubio, Defensor Sporting, Montevideo Wanderers and the no longer extant River Plate have won more than one title, although curiously, all of them have won 4 apiece. However, their domestic league has been on some sort of a decline over the last few decades, something which noted football historian David Goldblatt argues is down to Paco Casal, once a super agent brokering deals for Uruguay's top players such as Enzo Francescoli to move overseas, and then the owner of the media company Tenfield, who brought the TV rights for the league and the national team. The company continued to broker deals to send players abroad and leech money from the national team, the league and its clubs until 2016, when captain Diego Godin led a movement to take on a Nike bid for the national team's marketing rights over that of Tenfield, which led to Casal's enterprise being narrowly removed of that role, as well as being stripped of its broadcasting rights later on in the year. With the lack of income coming into the league, certainly in comparison with other major leagues across South America and indeed Europe, it's now almost certain that top clubs will continue to lose their star men to clubs in Europe, simply because they do not have the wherewithal to keep them at home, although a greater focus on youth development has undoubtedly contributed to the rise of the national team. Regardless of what happens in the future though, Uruguay will always have the status as perennial overachiever going for them, considering they are the smallest country by population to win the World Cup, and they have triumphed more times in the Copa America than any other nation in its history. That just about concludes today's video on the footballing scene in Uruguay. If you enjoyed this video, of course, please do not forget to smash that like button and of course subscribe while you are at it. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.